Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Show. My name is Thomas. I am your esteemed host, and I am glad to be your esteemed host. It is Saturday. What is the date? 2015th, day after Valentine's Day. So, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. If you hate Valentine's Day, happy hating Valentine's Day to you too. Either way, perfectly fine. It's made up. Doesn't really matter. What does matter is what is taking place in Europe at the Munich Security Conference, where Trump has sent his envoys to effectively lay down the law in regards to what is going to be the new orthodoxy coming out of the United States, and that new orthodoxy being us first, our concerns, our primary. And we are going to let Europe deal with Europe. It is fascinating whether it is Hegseth or whether it is J.D. Vance. In J.D. Vance's case, I'm going to play his speech. This speech will go down in the record books. I have never seen a person lecture all of Europe and European leaders in the way that J.D. Vance is doing so in this speech. It is brutal. He even at one point in his speech says, there is a new sheriff in town. And he goes after them for things that I've gone after them for. And again, this is not arbitrary. If you are going to tell me your value set, and then I point out, well, it doesn't seem like you're living up to your value set, I'm not the bad guy. You're the one that is coming up with this value set. And that, in large part, is J.D. Vance's speech to Europe. I've pointed out over and over again that Donald Trump, more likely than not, would want a populace in various positions in Europe. USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, worked against those populist movements, whether they were on the right or whether they were on the left. And on the left, I'm talking about Fico in Slovakia, or on the right, let's say Carl Gogetscu in Romania. The thing that these groups have in common is we don't want the wars. We're sick of these wars. We don't want to be involved in Ukraine. We're sick of that. We don't want to pay an extra expense. We're sick of that. Something that is infinitely rational and that the publics agree with, which is why they had to work so hard to either destroy the Romanian election or to try to overthrow the Georgian government. My point is very basic. Vance is laying down the law. And there was something, if you remember, Putin in that press conference said something to the effect of, the moment that Donald Trump asserts himself, European leaders will wag their tails. Trump put that out in his Truth Social account. They will wag their tails. They have no choice otherwise. I'm going to play Vance's speech. I'm going to play the entirety of the speech. It's fascinating. What's up, chat? Janice Anderson, shout out to you. Lasambre, Deborah Wilson. What's happening, Deborah? Glad to have you back. All right. I'm going to play the speech. I'm going to play the speech in its entirety. I thought it was fantastic. I have no complaints about the speech at all. He hits upon notes that I've hit upon. Yes, it is weird for me to make this case. I have said before that J.D. Vance articulates Trump better than Trump because he is a better arbiter. He says it better. He's cleaner in the way that he talks about the stuff, where Trump is all over the place. People question whether Vance was a good pick. I think at this point the answer is definitively yes. Vance was a fantastic pick for Trump. I'm going to play a speech. I'm going to let it play out. It's about 15 minutes, give or take. Shout out to Vance on this.
To all the gathered delegates and luminaries, and thanks especially to the hosts of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on such an incredible event. We're, of course, thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And, you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany, too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person, but no. This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent, We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear, A couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
I'm sitting here slightly astonished by the speech. And I know I use the word a lot, so, the fact that I use it a lot may undercut the value of the word that I'm trying to use in this moment. But that is a profound speech. It articulates a vision by Trump that is, I think, far more coherent than I think people will give it credit for. Otherwise, if you're just watching Trump and the way that he does and the way that he functions. I sat here thinking to myself that he's right. There's a level of authoritarian liberalism, if you want to call it, built into the way Democrats and European leaders function. In their point of view, the way we are is right. Anything outside of these bounds is wrong. And because that's the case, in a sense of law, in a sense of the way we behave legislatively, we will enforce that. And Europe takes it to the secondary level of, we will cancel elections. Full stop. Now, in this country, elections, I want to say, are somewhat sacred. And so it is wild when Donald Trump turns around and attacks an election. So hypocrisy aside for the moment, is a statement of values. And in that statement of values, it is radically democratic. Because what he is effectively saying is, A, you have started with a brand of authoritarian liberalism where you think you are so right that you can cancel elections, whether in Romania or for that matter, threatening to do so in Germany, and that you will put people in cages or tax them in some way if they come to a choice or say things that is beyond the boundaries that you yourselves have set. Okay, well, that's not democracy. I don't know what that is. That's not democracy. The reality of it is countries are like organisms. They grow, they expand, they change. And they change according to the people who are in those things, and let's say the comfort or discomfort that those people incur. If those people are comfortable, it will grow, it will be beautiful, people will be less violent to one another because their environment allows them to be that way. That's why people always make the argument about Star Trek, saying there is no way Star Trek can exist in the reality that they are in, because you cannot function that way against other countries or people or countries or civilizations that have come to the conclusion that you can prey on people like the Star Trek universe. That's why Station 31 was created, because they were like, okay, we need something to protect the children in the same way that adults protect their children from a violent outside world. I'm saying that governments change. It is built into the framework. Those governments are responding to the things, or let's say the publics, the populations, are responding to their natural environment. If you had a meteor that was about to hit Earth, your government and the people would change. The things that would be allowed would be different than the things would be allowed if a meteor was not about to hit Earth. I'm saying that is natural. That is reality. For Democrats or for the liberal governments abroad to take this point of view of creating a crystal vase is nonsense. What Vance is pointing out is that it's nonsense. If you have a large swath of immigrants coming into a country as a point of thing, and by the way, I disagree with him on some of this, and your public says we need to do something about that, then the public is responding to the natural environment. And in responding to the natural environment, whether they are correct or wrong, putting people in positions to do something about the thing that they care about. That is a government. That is democracy in every sense of the word. Somewhere along the way, liberals forgot it. If you say we are going to censor, we are going to stop, we are going to inhibit, whatever that is, you're doing something else. It's not that the public is going to be always right. The public is going to get it wrong, just like a human being can get it wrong. That's life. It's that taking a political stance to inhibit that change, that progress, could be to the detriment of that government. When they decide that they want to have a war with in Ukraine, and they decide to devote $300 billion to that, and the public says, whoa, what the hell are you doing? And that government decides we need to censor that public. We need to stop that public from complaining, from bitching about it. And the way they complain is on social media, so we need to go after the social media accounts of people who are complaining. Okay, that is mind-blowing. That's not democracy. That's something else. That is an authoritarian regime that is using the levers of power at their disposal to cajole, to change, to tweak, to alter, to inhibit the American public from coming to a conclusion that is in the American public's best interest. Whether that's taking place here or whether it's taking place in Europe, it's wrong. On its face, it's wrong. And I don't mean wrong in the ethereal sense. I mean wrong in comparison to the values that these same people in the US and in Europe espouse. They just locked up, what is the guy's name, in Austria, just like Medhurst, for doing journalism that they don't like. Now, the question is going to be what Trump remembers that when people are criticizing him and Israel for genocide, and whether or not that speech would get criminalized in the same way that J.D. Vance is bitching here. That will be the test. That is his sacred pony, or at the very least the pony that gave him $100 million. But in theory, it's right. Now, yeah, this gets tested when you get Nazis, right? Because then it's not a free speech issue. It's something that is antagonistic to the state. But that is the test of that point of view. If Twitter becomes a haven for Nazis, does Elon Musk respond to Twitter being a haven of Nazis? That's always a fascinating question to me, to free speech people. But that to the side, what J.D. Vance is saying here, at the very least from the standpoint of, we are governments that believe that democracies require a free press to be able to get across reality so the public can respond to that reality Hence, responding meaning change. It is built into the bricks. There's no way around it. And so that speech is fascinating to me. He also makes this argument, though, keep in mind about the immigration thing, on some level about the cause of that immigration. These wars or these regime change operations like USAID or NED or, buying terrorists to help overthrow governments in the Middle East. And you get a flood of people fleeing into Europe in the same way that you have a lot of people fleeing into the US from governments that we were screwing around in. Even that's on the table. Because if you remember, one of the first things that Trump did when he got in office from Obama was to kill Obama's regime change plan in Syria. He just brought on Tulsi Gabbard, who is one of the loudest voices about these regime change wars need to stop. It is not in our best interest. And Trump himself, when he was Tucker Carlson, and he came up with this canard that he was trying to shoot Liz Cheney in the face, pointed out, we spent $10 trillion on regime change wars and got nothing for it. Okay, if that is influencing immigration, which it is, into Europe, which it is, then this also fits within the context of this worldview, or let's say on the international stage. He is going to fleece America. But on this point, he is right. I'm fascinated by that speech. I often wonder, what are they protecting? So, what I mean by that is, if I am a liberal, and I say, I am right. I'm right. Whatever it is, I'm right. And I say anything outside the boundaries of my rightness is wrong. It's black and white. And I say, if I'm in a position of power, because I'm right, I'm going to enforce these boundaries. Okay. And then you go so far as to say, in protecting these boundaries, there's certain people that can get elected and certain people that are ineligible. Bernie Sanders is ineligible. Donald Trump is ineligible. George Bush, he's okay. He's okay. He's a conservative, but he fits within my boundaries. He's okay. An election takes place. You kill Gorgetchku from getting in office. You kill whatever other person getting in office. And I don't mean that. I mean it politically. What is it that you are protecting? Is it just the worldview? And I guess the worldview has consequences in regards to how people live. But if you think of third-way Democrats, getting rid of New Deal Democrats, who wanted these kind of economic populism, what is the thing that they're protecting when they're eliminating somebody like Sanders from the race? They're all supposed to be Democrats. And if they're indeed supposed to be Democrats, and he fits within that context, then what are they protecting? It seems like they've gone beyond. I don't know. It's just weird. Good speech. It will go into the record books. He got very few applause lines, and even the ones he got were tortured. But he's right in that philosophy, let's say, this theory of democracy that he's given. Because it is a theory of democracy. You require free speech. You require people be able to say what is a true thing that the government may not necessarily like to hear. That is built into the bricks. And if those governments have gotten to the point of coming up with, well, that's misinformation that you're saying that the laptop was phony. That's misinformation that you're saying that it came from a lab. We have no idea one way or the other. And yet they would classify it as false. It's misinformation. It's misinformation that Sputnik is given real news. We were given real news. It may have come from a lab. The laptop was a hoax. It was not an unprovoked war of aggression. The government may take a different point of view, but the government is lying. It requires the public to be able to say the government is full of shit. It's lying. It's lying for reasons, but it's lying. And if you start to, that's misinformation, that's censorship, and we're going to go after the organs that the public listens to and pays attention to, then you are damaging your government in severe ways. And you're inhibiting the public from being able to change course in a way that organisms can change course. Evolution can change course. It is what it is. It goes down the record thing, never allow it. I'm saying publics are like people in that way. And it requires knowledge, information, real, a point of view, to look at reality for what it is and say, how do I want to move for my best interests as I navigate my way through reality? If you're inhibiting that, you're doing something else other than democracy or representative government. That's my point. Vance is right. Vance is right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. Janice Anderson. Nobody was feeling Vance. Yeah, no one was feeling Vance. No. They were, oh God, you could feel their assholes pucker as he said all of that. Because he's right. And it's fascinating to me that the U.S. administration is lecturing Europe. There is nothing that gets across your vassal status than to be lectured like a child. Nothing. As an adult, you don't typically get lectured. Maybe if you're working somewhere. But again, even in that context, it's a hierarchy in the way that it's functioning. He is lecturing Europe. You're getting it wrong. You're fucking up. You're fucking up. Yes, Janice, you're absolutely right. They weren't feeling him on that. And it says, is it POT? Pot, meat, kettle. Oh, pot, meat, kettle is part of the censorship complex himself. Fair enough. I don't know who pot, meat, kettle is. Oh, you mean Vance. Right. Right. Here's pot, meets, kettle. All right. I'm going to end this. I was feeling the speech. So you're saying there's a such thing as reality. Plinkus. Look, even if it is individual to you, meaning even if you're in a dream state, for all intents and purposes, everything that you're encountering, you're thinking is real. For you, it's real. Is that all it requires? For the person in that dream state, I suppose, yeah. Plinkus, from our point of view, yes, it is. My job is on some level decipher it for whatever it is. And if we're living the same one, God bless. Jamal Thomas, why don't you have Danny Sheehan on your show? I've met Danny Sheehan, actually. So at the UFO conference, when it was in D.C., and there were various people who were giving their statements. Johnson, oh God, was it Johnson? It was several people. All of them were fascinating. Many of them worked at UFO facilities or military facilities, and they were talking about UFOs there. Danny Sheehan was one of the people who was speaking. I had the opportunity to speak to him for 20 seconds, something like that. I've asked him to come on my show. I've invited him to come on my show. I've sent him email after email to come on my show. He never has responded. I've tried. I'm not big enough. If you guys help me get 100,000 subs, he'll come on my show. Under that context. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. You guys have a fantastic weekend. Signing off.